When I first moved into the house on Willow Creek Drive, everything felt just a bit too neat. The books were always stacked perfectly on the shelves, not a single cushion ever out of place on the cream-colored couch. Even the air had a kind of stillness to it, like the house was holding its breath. My husband, Mark, had lived here for years before I came into the picture, raising Ryan alone after his first wife passed. I never saw the place messy, never heard laughter echo off the walls. It was a museum of quiet routines. Ryan was polite. That's the word everyone used, polite. Neighbors said it like it was a compliment, but it always sounded like a warning. He was 20, in college, home on breaks and sometimes weekends. He called me Susan, never Mom, and that was fine with me. We made small talk over meals, if Mark was home, but when it was just the two of us, dinners were eaten in a quiet that wasn't hostile but heavy, like there was a third presence at the table, something unspoken. I remember the way he used to pass behind me in the hallway, always giving a small nod but never looking directly at me. His scent, a mix of old cologne and fresh laundry, lingered just a second longer than it should have. I tried not to notice. I tried harder not to care. He spent most of his time in the room at the end of the hall, the one with the shut door and the blackout curtains that made it seem like it belonged to another house entirely. Sometimes at night, I'd hear music leaking from under that door. Not loud, never loud, but just enough to remind me he was there. Jazz, sometimes classical. Never anything angry, never anything youthful. It struck me as odd for a boy his age. Then again, I never really knew what kind of boy he was. Mark said he'd taken after his mother, quiet, internal, to smart, for his own good, but he never talked about her much, and Ryan certainly never did. There was one evening, I remember clearly. I had baked lemon rosemary chicken and set the table for 3, forgetting Mark was out of town. When Ryan walked in and saw the full spread, he looked surprised, almost uncomfortable. He sat down across from me, thanked me softly, and we ate. No words, just the sound of forks tapping against plates, and the occasional clink of glass. I kept my eyes down, but I could feel his on me once or twice. That kind of observing that isn't quite curiosity, but something more difficult to name. We existed like shadows in the same space, crossing paths in the kitchen, brushing past one another at the foot of the stairs, living parallel but separate lives. I didn't know him. Not really. He was my stepson, yes, but only in the way that titles exist to give structure to something that still feels entirely formless. Until that night, it started with thunder, a low rolling growl that slipped through the open window just as I was drying the last plate. The house had grown darker than I realized, the early summer sky smeared in bruised clouds. I closed the window and turned on the lamp, its soft amber glow barely touching the corners of the living room. Outside, the trees swayed in the rising wind. Inside, it was quiet except for the distant sound of his door creaking open. Ryan rarely left his room at night. His habits were orderly, predictable. But that evening, I heard footsteps in the hallway, hesitant but deliberate. I didn't call out. I just listened, frozen with the dish towel still in my hand. Then the sound of the front door unlocking, opening slightly, then closing again. I stepped to the window just in time to see him walk out onto the porch, barefoot. Standing at the edge of the steps with his head tilted back toward the sky. I don't know what moved me, but I followed. The rain hadn't started yet, but the wind carried the storm's breath thick and electric. He didn't turn when I stepped out. I stood behind him, maybe 2 or 3 feet away, close enough to see his shoulders rise and fall in a rhythm. That wasn't quite steady. She liked storms, he said, not facing me. His voice was low, almost lost in the wind. My mom, she used to say they made the world honest for a little while. I had never heard him talk about her before. Not once. His words hung in the space between us, strange and sacred. I said, nothing. I didn't want to break it. I used to sit out here with her, he continued, before the chemo, before everything smelled like bleach and sadness. Something in my chest cracked. A quiet fissure. I didn't want Dad to remarry. he said, turning his face slightly, just enough for me to see the reflection of the clouds in his eyes. Not because I hated you. I didn't. I just didn't want to lose her all over again. I swallowed, but my throat was dry. He looked down, almost ashamed. You're not what I expected, he added. You never tried too hard. I think that made it easier. The rain began, first as a whisper, then as a hush. He didn't move, neither did I. The wind blew a strand of his hair across his cheek, and he made no effort to push it away. There was something childlike about him in that moment, and something ancient too. I still smell her perfume sometimes, he whispered. In the closet, or on my pillow, like she's hiding. I stepped forward, not to touch him, just to be closer. We stood there in silence, two strangers tethered by grief, by absence, by a memory that wasn't mine but felt like it could have been. The storm wrapped around us like a truth too heavy to say aloud. The power went out just after midnight. I was in the kitchen, warming my hands on a cup of tea I didn't really want, when the lights blinked once then vanished. The hum of the refrigerator faded into silence, leaving only the soft rustle of wind and the tap of rain against the windows. I stood still, waiting to hear footsteps from down the hall, but none came. The silence in the house felt thicker than darkness. I lit a candle from the drawer beneath the sink and made my way slowly to the living room. The flame flickered, throwing gold shadows across the walls, making the furniture look unfamiliar taller. Older. I pulled the throw blanket from the back of the couch and wrapped it around my shoulders. A moment later, I heard the creak of the hallway floorboards. Ryan stepped in quietly, barefoot again, shirt slightly wrinkled, as though he'd been lying down but not sleeping. He didn't speak, just looked around the room, then at me, with something unreadable in his face. I gestured toward the couch, and he sat without a word, hands clasped between his knees. The candle between us cast his face in sharp lines, his jaw, the hollow of his cheekbones, the tired weight under his eyes. Can't sleep? I asked. He shook his head slowly. It's loud in my head tonight, I nodded. I didn't ask what that meant. Some things don't need translation. The rain picked up again, steady now, like fingers strumming softly across the roof. He leaned back into the couch, arms crossed over his chest, but his eyes never left the candle. I could feel something shifting in the air, not heavy, more like the last held breath before a truth slips out. Sometimes I wonder, he said suddenly, his voice almost inaudible, if grief ever really goes away, or if we just get better at hiding it. I looked at him then, really looked. He wasn't a boy anymore. He hadn't been for a long time. There was a depth in his gaze that frightened me, not because it was dark, but because it was known. Like looking into a mirror I hadn't realized was there all along. I see her in you, he added, not breaking eye contact. In the way you sit, how you hold your breath when you're thinking. It's strange. Sometimes I forget you're not her. A flush rose in my throat. The weight of his words pressed against something delicate in me. I didn't mean that. In a bad way, he said quickly. I don't know. Maybe it's the candlelight. Maybe it's the storm. But everything feels softer tonight. Even you. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of memories we didn't share, of moments suspended in the space between us. I couldn't speak. I didn't need to. In that golden, flickering moment, I saw him fully, not as my stepson, not even as a reminder of someone gone, but as something entirely his own, a person caring more than anyone should, and still looking for where to set it down.